but I still don't get it. A lot of things that are going on. No? It's everything's so different. Everything's changed, and I'm still trying to figure out what's going on. No? In many ways, everything's so changed. Everything's so fast, so quick,
Mhm.
so expanded. So global. So
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it leaves us with the question of whether we are to catch up or try to catch up with these strange new times, or whether we're to just let them pass us by like some kind of fad or phase and stick to what we know and what we're accustomed to, and hope that this way of living and working that we understand comes back into fashion or into fad, let's say. I'm not so sure how to approach these things. I think it's also funny doing a kind of public conversation like we're gonna do today, because in a way it implies to people listening or watching that we have some sort of answers for them. And I think it's a little comical because I feel I don't have many answers.
as you mentioned, maybe we don't have answers, but we have questions. And
Hmm.
which is even better, I think. Just talking about it, I mean, just this very brief thing we just shared, no? And I've had this sense of like falling behind, and it's obvious and it's natural because everything's so fast. Everything's so fast, it's moving, like that you feel like sort of like being left behind, but it's impossible to keep it like at the same rhythm. I mean, it's not human. I mean, and even as you mentioned, like in fashion times, but art is not fashion.
Hmm.
Art has its own times, I think, and they are trying to, or they've moved it in those that rhythm, which is impossible, I think, for art, impossible for a human being. And I'm very curious, Josh, because we met, I think it was more than 1 year ago through our dear friend Josh Sabo, and I was very interested in your sensibility, in your views about life, about art, and suddenly, I mean, through social media, I saw like this big, like, boom, this something happened with your work, something happened with what you were doing. It connected through so many phases, through so many levels, and something was happening. Something is happening. What happened?
Yeah. This is a great question. When we met, it was March 2025, so a little over a year ago. And since then, I had the pleasure and the honor to debut a body of work that I had been working on for 5 years. So not the most amount of time, but also not the least. I had spent quite a lot of time here in Florida, where I am on the road, making photographs, staging pictures, and amassing a body of work, which I then edited down and presented as the solo exhibition. And what I imagine you're alluding to when you say this kind of explosion happened is the reverberation of that exhibition opening. And so, as is the case when one has many, many years of work, one has a lot of energy tied up to that work, and when it becomes time to release that or share that with the world, the reverberations can be grand. And so I made it a very specific point to um, work as hard as I could to see that work shared amongst as many people as possible. And so I reached out to many different magazine editors and writers and people whose perspective I, appreciated and respected. And I, asked if they would be interested in sharing this work or having conversations around it, um, so that it might find its audience, so that it might find the people who it's been meant to to find. So yeah, since that time, since we met, I had this exhibition. I did quite a bit of press around it, and so now, I'm kind of living in the reverberations or in the shadow of that very special moment. And I think you may know what it's like, or you may agree that once you do have an exhibition, particularly of work that you've never exhibited before, it sort of marks a chapter in your life, right? It marks a chapter in your journey. And so here I am almost on the other side of that chapter, and I'm looking out on the horizon and I'm wondering, what might be next for me. And I'd love to ask you, how do you feel after a solo exhibition when it's a body of work that you're showing for the first time? Do you feel any sort of do you feel like a withdrawal, like you've had all this attention or all this energy, and then suddenly the show is over and now things are very quiet and you're in a state of confusion of where to go next, or do you feel relief? Yeah, what is that like for you?
It's always different. It's a mix of emotions always, because as you mentioned, you work. I mean, I don't work to exhibit, but I exhibit once I've worked a lot, no? So once I have the body of work, then comes like the process to show it, to share it, to do an effective project. And there are things you control and you can manage, but there are a lot of things that are right there just to happen or not to happen, no? Uh, it's quite because I mean, as artists, you obviously expose your work, but you expose yourself with it. So it's a moment of a lot of vulnerability, no? To be listening to comments, to judgments, to opinions, to everything. No, a lot of things are going on. No, a lot of exposure, exposing yourself. No, a lot. It's also like to work a lot to bring a good product, a good quality product for the public, for to be shared with. And there's also a lot of self demands around it, no? Because you want to do something with excellence, uh, with quality for them, no? And that's I think that's also a task to accomplish. And
Hmm.
so I mean, there's a lot of things, and there's always the tricks of the mind, no? Like to what's coming next. The moment you think of the future, you're nervous, no? You can go through anguish or through mm, mind traps, no? The moment you start to have expectations, then you're trapped again, no? So it's like just I mean, and I think what I feel of what you're doing is that you're doing it very honestly. I mean, that's what I think, what I feel when I see. It's very genuine. It's something you feel, and you're connecting with people that meet there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm thinking as well of what the contrasts are between our practices, in the sense that much work probably happens inside of the studio and probably happens on your own or perhaps with a few others. And in contrast, I'm realizing how so much of my work is about community and the act of creation in collaboration with other people, right? So what I mean on a practical level is that in my photographs, there are often groups of people and they're coming together for the sake of making these pictures. And what that kind of effect has in terms of the reception of the work, in terms of the activity or the energy that you're describing, is that once work is displayed from that kind of body of work or that method of working that involves many people, many people are then involved in the displaying of it. People want to come see the photographs they were featured in or played a part in the making of. And so perhaps without even intending to, I found myself in the midst of this vortex of community where in the making of my work there's a communal aspect, in the sharing of my work there's a communal aspect, and I'll also add that in the sort of public programming that I enjoy doing, where I get to bring ideas to institutions and museums so far around the country, perhaps one day around the world and even in Mexico City, where you are. In those moments, I'm also bringing together other people and creating a space for dialogue and collaboration and exchange. And you may know I have this public program. It's called Photo Book Speed Date, and it's an evening at typically museums where guests are invited to bring a favorite art book or photography book from their own collection from home and to sit across from someone else, preferably someone they don't know. They exchange books for a short moment or two and they have a dialogue around them. So perhaps you bring a book by one of your favorite artists or an artist who's inspiring the work you're making right now, and I get to see that book and hear from you about it, and you get to see in reverse the one I've brought. And so a program like that, is very much about other people and connection and activity. And, it's something that I cannot do, just alone on my own. And and I see that public engagement, particularly because it happens at art and museum spaces. I see that as very much a part of my practice too. And so, I think back as well to what you said about vulnerability and the kind of showing of work and how it is a vulnerable place for us as artists. And I wonder if that really is true. I mean, yes, it's vulnerable to share our work, but at the same time, isn't it possible that once the work is hanging in a space, it's actually already been through so many filters of friends or trusted collaborators or your kind of, your high circle of people who you're willing to share your work with, but before, let's say, you share it with the public, and I suppose that in my case at least, I'd be curious to hear about yours. There are quite a few people, among them our mutual friend Joshua Sobel, who I share my work with before it ever, sort of reaches the public. And so there is a bit of certainty I have when I go to do a show because I know that this work has gone through those filters. And I wonder if you have a circle of advisors, you could call it, or friends or collaborators that you trust with your work before it's time to debut.
I do, and I mean, you've been in my studio, and I've even shared my work with you before. Some of it has not been even been exhibited, and uh, and it's sort of like more on one uh, experience. Uh, what I can reflect upon it, it's like I can sense within what you do and how you do it, like a communal, as you said, like a community arrangement around you, your work, even the community participates in your work. And there's like something like that that grows within itself, like as a community. There are more competitive, harsh, negative, because people think that with one word they can destroy who you are, what you do. Not even in art. When we're speaking about humanity and we're speaking, I mean, you cannot exclude or everything is there, no? However,
Mhm.
when we're talking about kindness, when we're talking about creativity, when we're talking about making a community, when we're talking about bonding, I mean, it feels much nicer.
Sure, it definitely does. And I think what you're saying is there is a flip side to every coin, right? Like as I even in this moment think of some of your work, particularly the paintings where you depict these really sumptuous, suites, right? That's something that's beautiful and positive. And then there's also this flip side to that work. And of course, you would explain it much better than I do, but there's this flip side of indulgence, overindulgence, and the implications of sweets and hedonism and et cetera, et cetera. And when it comes to artists and their work, and I think it's interesting because criticism is so essential to being a great artist or to making great work, right? We have to be our own biggest critics in order to grow, in order to look at a wall of things we've made and say, okay, this is good. This meets my standard, or this speaks to the things I'm trying to speak to, and this is not. And this, as much as I love this, it has to be left on the cutting room floor. And so, to the critics, to the people on their phones who feel it's worth their time to send negative comments or share negative views, I would just say, you can never be any harsher than I am on my own self. We all have to be, something of our own harshest critic, right?
How many times we say it's terrible and we destroy the work, or get angry or mad, or we leave it there. But curiously, I mean, it's not always again that linear or that consistent. Months after or weeks after you turn out the work and you say, "Oh, it's not that bad. Actually, I like it." Or sometimes the other way, no? You like a work and then after some months you say I mean, this is terrible, no? Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's
time is such a big factor, right? Time allows us to see our work in so many different lights. It's why I love working on a longer term body of work, because it does afford us that time to sit with things, to turn things around and lean them against the wall so we don't have to look at them, only to discover them, 3, 4 years later and realize that no, maybe we were onto something there and it's worth addressing or reconsidering or revisiting. Um, but how can we possibly appeal to every single person? We are just one artist, and we are offering, we hope, a sincere, honest perspective from our own point of view, and that's not always going to appeal to every single person, and maybe that's okay, right? Maybe we don't need to be the most popular and appeal like pop music to everyone in the world. It's okay to find our niche and our audience. At least I believe that. I sometimes joke that the people who I share my work with, that the friends who are out of town and not here in Miami, that they are, my investors. And of course nobody is investing in me in a financial sense, but I just mean it in this sort of figurative or almost emotional sense. And I want to provide value to my investors, to my followers, and it brings me a lot of joy to not only make work and get to share it, but then also to have a say in how that experience is communicated through the internet, through social media, so that my friends like yourself can feel that they are at least a part of this journey or able to watch it. And I don't know if I would say that's really a part of my art practice, but I do believe it's an important element to take authorship and control over your image, your social media image. And we live in this strange time when so much of us wants to fight against that because it's not natural, because it's moving so fast, because it's also against it's sort of out of our control, right? It's controlled by this algorithm, et cetera, et cetera. And I think in spite of that, it can just be interesting to, take some authorship in that sense. And I see you doing it as well. And I find that though I'm not in Mexico all the time, I'm able to at least share in the joy that you're experiencing, sharing your work in new venues and new situations and new environments, and as well in these conversations that you have, right? This is another means of doing that, of letting people into to your world, your network, your community, your process. And I think that's valuable. I think there are people who will benefit from listening to these conversations.